CCM, through its 119K Commission, has spent the past year seeking out ways to improve the way Connecticut delivers a public education system for not just at-risk and disconnected youth, but for every individual in this great state. No survey on the education landscape would have been complete without seeking the input of the School and State Finance Project. Their data-driven research and analysis is second to none and has given them a reputation of reliability and trustworthiness. We are joined today by Lisa Hammersley, their Executive Director, as well as Joe DeLong, CCM's Executive Director, to discuss the future of education and how we can put young people first. The Municipal Voice is the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities podcast in collaboration with WNHH LP 103.5 FM. I'm your host, Matt Ford. As always, be sure to give us a like and let us know what you're thinking in the comments. CCM's Municipal Voice podcast continues to present a key forum on important state-local issues. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the consensus views of CCM or our member municipal leaders.
Lisa, Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Good to have you. So, in our intro, I described the School and State Finance Project's excellent work around education funding, and primarily in the areas of racial and economic disparities. Lisa, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the State School Finance Project and your role there?
Absolutely. So the School and State Finance Project, we're going into our 10th year actually next July, which is very exciting. But our previous executive director and founder realized that while there were a lot of education advocacy organizations working to further policy here in the state of Connecticut, there was not one organization that was specifically looking at education funding. And when you are a generalist and you need to cover a lot of topics, it allows you to really scratch the surface of a topic and really get into the weeds of the issue at hand. And so the School and State Finance Project was established. At the time, the thought was that the organization would do some great work in a few short years and then cease to exist. However, change takes time. And so it was realized that the organization should not be time limited. It should be, here and operating in the state of Connecticut to continue to push policy changes that increase equity in the state's education funding system. And so we are here, we are thriving, and we're going into our 10th year.
Excellent. And how do you do your work? Collecting data, doing deep dive analysis. What does that look like?
Sure. So our team, we are data nerds through and through. We capture all of the publicly available data that the state puts out with regards to education funding, or really any data point that touches the education experience for public school students. And we analyze that data and look at it to see, certain trends, certain disparities. You referenced the racial and economic funding disparity that we have here in the state. And then we work collaboratively as an organization, but with other stakeholders as well, to develop policy solutions to address some of those inequities and to continue to move the state towards a more equitable funding system here in the state of Connecticut. And as you all know, Connecticut is a relatively small state. We have a lot of small, wonderful municipalities, but we also have very wide disparities in property wealth. And so when our organization is working, we're looking to specifically increase the state's equitable distribution of resources, not to take away from our property wealthy communities, but really to help the state fill the gap for those communities that have reduced property wealth that it can tax to provide resources to its students and its classrooms.
Yeah, the whole property tax issue is certainly a big one for us, as Joe can attest. But what is the end result of some of these analyses? Do you start a research project with an initiative in mind, or do you see where the data takes you?
Both, really. So if we have a topic that we're very interested in, we'll compile all the data that we can and then analyze it and we brainstorm some policy solutions. Or it could be talking to a superintendent, and the superintendent brings up a topic of conversation that we haven't really thought about that really makes us start to wonder and explore. I'll give it, for example, we recently had a great new contact over in the eastern side of the state. And we were talking about RESCs specifically and how can help particularly our smaller communities. And he brought up the topic of regionalization, which at our team just yesterday to sit down and to say, okay, let's look at the statutes, let's understand the process, let's understand the barriers, because there are some significant barriers. People like to throw out regionalization as the thing that all school districts should do.
Mhm.
You think about the actual process, there's flaws and there's problems throughout, which would result in some towns saying, I don't want to regionalize and I'd rather
Mhm.
operate this very small school district on my own because, that could be a headache. And so
Mhm.
we just came up with some policy solutions that legislators can consider to make those kind of shared cooperative agreements,
Mhm.
better for municipalities, which would therefore make a more enriching education experience for students that reside in that town.
Definitely. You mentioned RESCs. Just for the people at home, what does RESC stand for?
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Matt. So RESCs are regional education service centers, and they
Okay.
were established to allow for the cooperative shared services amongst municipalities with regards to the provision of education services here in the state of Connecticut.
Okay. Makes sense. So we are, of course, also joined by CCM Executive Director Joe DeLong, and we here at CCM have just released a report of our own. It's called Young People First, and it's a plan not just to reconnect at-risk or disconnected youth, but to improve education outcomes in our state. Joe, can you talk us a little bit about that journey?
Sure. Well, let me first say, Matt, a big part of that journey was working with Lisa and her team. Lisa didn't mention this, but she talks about them being data nerds. They may be data nerds, but Lisa, prior to this, she had a position as the budget director in the Senate Republicans office. And when I met Lisa, she was in that capacity, and I can tell you she understood the state budget better than anybody else in all of state government, frankly. Better than any of the budget analysts. The former Senate majority or minority leader, Len Fasano, he used to say, listen, if you want to know what's in this budget or how the state budget works, Lisa knows more about it than anyone. So I was really thrilled when she came out of that position into the State School Finance Project. And the work that the 119K Commission did, obviously, we were a lot of municipal leaders who understood and felt at the very ground level, at the very granular level, these challenges with these young people in our communities. That did not make them experts, and I think that was one of the things that was really great about this process is we didn't bring anybody to the table in terms of commissioners that came to the table with these preconceived notions that they knew what needed to be done. And I thought the process really worked well because of that, because they leaned heavily on interviewing young people, understanding what the impact or these challenges were in their lives, interviewing and working with people like Lisa at the State School Finance Project, and understanding how budget allocation and school resourcing and the financial resourcing impacts this population. Interviewing nonprofits, and hearing from them of how they engage with young people at the ground level, and then looking at national experts and what they could bring to the table. And ultimately, what they came up with was a plan that filled in all of the different gaps that had been identified by all of these stakeholders, including the young people themselves. And then went out and sort of tested it to some degree with the partners. They didn't release the report and let everybody react to it. They went back to the different partners and said, here's what we're hearing, here's what we're thinking. Does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And really did that all the way again with all those stakeholders. Did it with the educators. Actually went to teachers and said, are we speaking to this appropriately? Because we're kind of speaking for you, and we shouldn't be speaking for you when you're the experts, and got their feedback where the educators said, yes, you are absolutely on the right track. These are the challenges that we experience every day. And so for me, it was a rewarding process simply because we typically at CCM take on challenges where we're sort of the subject matter experts and we're trying to drill a little deeper and we're trying to highlight the issues. This was a case where we, kind of leaned into a challenge where everybody in the room recognized we are not the experts.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad place to start, actually, because you start with a little bit of a clean slate leaning into the people who know what they're doing in this space and bringing them together for a more collaborative approach to the challenge before us.
Yeah, we didn't necessarily come with a lot of preconceived notions about what the answers were. We're just open minds to really listen. And as you mentioned, along the ways, we had lots of meetings and presentations, and we had experts and thought leaders for those. But when we had the school and state finance project, we had a briefing just for them. It speaks volumes about, the importance of their work. Can you tell us about that and maybe a little bit about what you or the commission in general learned from that important briefing?
Well, I think a lot. I mean, this report has the plan has 22 aligned actions within the plan. But when you break that plan down, 21 of those aligned actions were costed out sort of in one bucket.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole ECS, the education cost sharing funding formula, because it's such a driver, was costed out separately. So when you really think of the importance of that, where you have 21 of 22 aligned actions that are sitting over here,
Mm-hmm.
and one of those aligned actions that everybody felt the need to go so deeply into, I think was so incredibly important. And I think some of the work that came out of this process, and of course from some of the data and the information that we received from the State School Finance Project as well, is we all really think there's this narrative that we really think that we're doing all of this spending on education, that there's all of this money being spent. The reality is, from a state standpoint, the state of Connecticut is really in the bottom quartile when it comes to the percentage that they spend toward public education. Most of our neighbors, not all, but most of our neighbors spend at the state level anywhere from 42 to 45% of public education costs. In Connecticut, it's more like 36%.
Wow.
I think that was important to understand, that how we really more heavily rely on local property taxes to fund education proportionally than what most other states do. And that
Yeah.
relying on local property taxes really leans into or lends to those education inequities. In a lot of cases, the communities that have the greatest needs have the lowest amount of resources. So that proportionality matters. And then the other thing I think that matters is understanding that while the state, and a lot of it through the amazing work done by Lisa and her organization, because if not for them, this wouldn't have happened. Well, the state made significant investments in public education. So there are wins to celebrate over the last couple of years. Even those significant investments did not keep up with inflation. So as we looked at that and really went back to the Boston Consulting Group and analyzed that further, what we discovered was, on a per pupil basis since 2017, we're spending about, at the state level, we're funding education at about $400 less per pupil than what we were in 2017. So we're actually on a decline where it comes to that. And I think all of that work is really important, not to point fingers, but to set an accurate narrative for policymakers so they understand where the state fits in terms of how it funds public education. And they understand that where there's this narrative that says that we're not increasing taxes, which that is true at the state level, when that proportional share of state funding declines, it actually does result in fairly significant tax increases in the property tax at the local level. So I think it's important that all of that part of that policy is analyzed as we go through this.
Yeah, there's a lot of detail in there to pay attention to.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM.
Lisa, obviously you've been paying close attention to the work since that research briefing, and have even released a statement of support for our Young People First plan, which we appreciate. Thank you. Not to put you on the spot, but tell us what you like about this plan.
I love what Joe just said in connecting all the dots with regards to the state share of education expenses and the impact to students, and the disproportionate impact to students that reside in communities that don't have, extreme abilities to pay and to increase taxes. And the connection between the report and the ultimate funding system that we have here in the state. So when I saw the commission, when I saw the original report that found the 119 disconnected and at-risk youth. For us at the School and State Finance Project, unfortunately, we were not surprised. Every year we come out with a very short policy briefing, nothing as extensive as what was conducted by the Boston Consulting Group. But we do find generally, historically, the state has a mismatch between student need and funding. And when we look at student need, it's clustered in all those areas that the Boston Consulting Group found for the largest numbers of at-risk or disconnected youth. That the largest concentration of at-risk and disconnected youth are actually, and not surprisingly, occurring in those communities that have the highest levels of student need and also the lowest levels of resources. So we definitely have a broken system here in the state. So when we first saw that report and just seeing the media attention and the reporting of it, it excited us at the School and State Finance Project, because this is information that needs to be out there, it needs to be discussed, and it needs to really be examined. How can we fix this system? And when I saw the final report that came out from the 119K Commission, I was blown away with just how thorough and extensive it was. It is a very holistic view at many different systems. It's not just education. We sit squarely in the education silo here, but like talking about housing, talking about the juvenile justice system, talking about the need to get prepared teachers and adequate teachers in the classroom. It's just a very holistic view at different things that the state can do to ensure that we reduce the number of disconnected youth, we increase the connectivity of our youth, which has such great long-term impacts on the state of Connecticut. It's not just keeping these kids so that they graduate from high school. It is so that they can become productive members of our community and have a significant impact on the state's economy long term. Never mind the fact that, individuals will be able to support themselves and grow a family. So I was super encouraged with the work of the commission. I think that they were extremely thoughtful. I also appreciated the report that came out prior to this Young People First report, which elevated the voices of the youth directly. I think that those are all conversations that have needed to occur here in the state of Connecticut, and I'm so glad that they have finally done so. I also, that data point about how I'm going to be honest, the state has made tremendous gains in terms of increasing its support for K-12 education over the past few years. We're not saying that the state has not, stepped up to the plate and has not provided any increases in K-12 support. They have. But when you look at the increase in state support and you compare it to, and you take into account inflation, that data point to me really resonates. And I think that it is a critically important data point for legislators to think about. While they have done great work and we appreciate all that they've done to date, there's still much more that needs to be done if the state's going to keep up with inflation and really step up to the plate for all of our public school students.
Yeah, good start, but no time to rest on any of that. You mentioned the impact of some of this stuff, and Young People First is really a plan with a capital P. There are 22 different proposals or aligned actions. Lisa, what would you call out? Funding equations, accountability systems, school facility funding policies. You kind of called those out in your statement, but which do you think would have the most impact of those?
I think all of them. I don't want to pick out one.
You want to pick your favorite child?
I think that it's important for the state to continue to step up and increase the state's distribution of equitable K-12 funding. Because it allows for the state to kind of overcome some of those disparities in terms of need versus wealth and ability to pay. But I do think that the accountability component is critically important as well. And you should not just provide more funding without ensuring that the state is doing what it needs to do in order to ensure that funds are being expended in an appropriate manner and in the best interest of the public school students. So I also think that the capital funding is another very important issue. When you have Hartford, and we know that Hartford has had its financial troubles over the past few years, right? And I don't believe that they have issued bonds on their own for a few years. I could be wrong. But when you have a leak in a school and you have ceiling tiles that are in significant disrepair, or you have floors that need to be replaced, and you have the city not being able to issue bonds or has not issued any new bonds, and you have a local school construction program that kind of lags, like when you walk into a school and when your school is not in good shape, that is not the best experience for a student walking into a classroom. And I think that all students should have safe learning, safe schools, and should have an appropriate learning experience. And so all of those components, and that gets back to the holistic nature of this report and the policy recommendations, all of those important components are important. So I do not want to pick one over any other. I think that the state really needs to tackle all of these issues in a very holistic manner and not just pick and choose some.
Yeah, talking about some of these schools that are outdated. I remember when COVID all started, we had issues with they had no air circulation. Some of these things, no air conditioning, like that stuff was all outdated and had to be quickly. And they had to do something about that kind of stuff. Joe, I know you would say all 22 actions are crucial, but if you had to pick one without to have go in without fight tomorrow, which one would it be?
Well, I do think that a lot of it begins with equitable funding, because you can't
Mhm.
do a lot of these other actions you can't do if they're not appropriately funded to do them. So, I mean, funding is a huge portion of it. But I'll tell you, Matt, to give you a little bit of a different answer. Lisa talked about the accountability piece. I don't know that this is my personal view. This is not a reflection of a conversation within the commission, but I'll change a little bit of a setting up with a change of subject. Obviously, I'm a lot older now, but I came from an athletic side of things. I've coached and, played college sports and the whole thing. And I've watched in my lifetime years ago where we started to have this shift of going to the every kid gets a trophy mentality, which I never liked. I was never, even when I played, if I was in a tournament and we didn't win the tournament and then I got a trophy at the end, I'm like, why are you giving me this? It doesn't mean anything. So me personally, I was not an every kid gets a trophy kind of person. But I have seen what I feel like at times our public education system has become more about a participation award and accountability sometimes than has become about actually preparing kids for the next step.
Yeah,
So we celebrate graduation, right? And we should. But should we celebrate graduation if the person we're graduating can't read?
yeah,
Can we celebrate graduation if the person we're graduating has no idea after we hand them the diploma where they're going? They have no plan beyond that. It's not just a higher ed plan. They're not sure how to enter the workforce. They're not sure whether it's a trade school. They're just, it's almost like, as you know, Matt, before I did this work, I ran a consolidated jail and prison system. And when I got there, people would be released, and they literally at their release, they would put them on a bus. The bus would take them to a bus stop. It would let them off, and it was there you go into the world.
yeah,
And a lot of times we saw those people back because they were left with nothing. They were left with no direction. They were, left with no skills. And when we worked on that in terms of the incarceration system, to some degree, we do that with our students, with our young people
yeah,
that we bring up through our school system. We are so measured in getting them to graduation and so fixated on the graduation rates, we're not really measuring whether the education that they got prepared them for the next steps in life, whether there was a
yeah,
plan for them upon graduation, whether they had systems of choice that allowed them to learn skills that were going to be valuable skills for them in the areas of interest that they could turn and go into careers. And I think that's part of this as well. And it's not a knock on educators. I think educators are doing everything that they can under remarkable layers of bureaucracy and very limited resources. And again, in the end, I feel like sometimes that we've turned public education into a participation trophy for kids as opposed to actually earning something that sets them up for future success. And I
yeah.
think that is something that, not directly in those terms, but I think that that is something this plan sort of outlines a better path forward in that regard as well.
Definitely. It brings up some interesting points. One of the more difficult parts of this report is saying what outcomes could be. We had this story recently that I think you were referencing about a girl who graduated high school and couldn't read. I just want to quote a bit from the recent op-ed on that subject. It was written by a Hartford teacher, actually, and was posted to the CT Mirror. In the last 7 years, policies for Hartford public schools have widened the cracks for our most vulnerable students to slip through. Attendance requirements for graduation have gone by the wayside, along with truancy officers and attendance compliance officers, to ensure our students attend school regularly. Without accountability and support, some of our students miss hundreds of days of school, putting them further and further behind. Understaffing of special education teachers and paraprofessionals have had a detrimental and irreversible impact on our special needs population of students. Can you both react to that to me? Joe, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think that that Hartford student, teacher was really expressing a lot of things that she was feeling,
Yeah,
personally at the ground level. I'll narrow in on one recommendation to kind of help, quantify some of those issues.
yeah,
You don't want a disruptive or a certainly not a dangerous, but you don't want a disruptive child in the classroom. They can impact everybody else's challenges within that classroom. But how do you deal with them? Well, in a lot of cases in the school system, we do out of school suspensions where we take them away from all of the resources that they may have in the path that may get them in the right direction, and we send them home.
yeah,
Well, what are we sending them home to? Maybe sending them home by themselves, sending them home without meals, maybe sending them to home it's not even a home. So out of school suspension can take that young person where their only shot in life is to be in school and put them straight to the streets. And if they do come back to school, puts them even further behind. So now the teacher gets them back in the classroom and says, they're a full unit or half unit behind everybody else in this class. So how do I deal with
yeah,
them? Now you go to the in-school suspension model, which can work under the right circumstances. But if we don't have the appropriate staffing, the appropriate curriculum, the appropriate teachers handling that, instead of taking a person in school suspension and making sure that they're keeping up, making sure that they're doing the work, making sure that they're prepared to reintegrate into the mainstream classroom, if you don't have the right resources, in school suspension becomes a whole mix of kids who are sitting in an auditorium or a library or something somewhere that aren't really getting much more than what they would be getting out of school
yeah,
suspension, other than the fact that they're maybe safer confined within those four walls. Those are very fixable things, but they require a change in policy and they require the resources to make sure that if a young person is not working out appropriately within the classroom, that they're still being held accountable, they're still being given opportunities, they're not being given up on. And a lot of times we push these kids out of the classroom, we're giving up on them. And
yeah,
then the other part of that, I spoke a little bit about choice.
mhm,
You have kids going to the alternate education system. Well, one of the things that happens with alt ed is it follows the same rigid, in many ways, rigid graduation standards that everybody else has to follow.
mhm,
So the traditional school system has not worked for me, maybe for a variety of reasons. And it might not be that I'm a troublemaker kid. There might be a whole lot of reasons why the traditional school system has not worked for me. So we decide for that child that's not working in the traditional school system, we're going to put them in an alternative school system to try to get them back on track. Well, it has to follow the same rigid requirements that weren't working for that young person to begin with in the
yeah,
regular school system. So the whole system needs to be re-examined in that way to make sure that we are not creating just pushing papers uphill, pushing papers downhill, and moving young people like robots through a system that gets them a participation trophy at the end. But we're actually meeting young people's individual needs. We're inspiring them and we're training them for success after K through 12. That's what a successful school system looks like.
Lisa, what do you think? How do we prepare them for the real world?
Yeah, so just thinking about what Joe just said, we were hopeful that the coronavirus pandemic would have allowed for that kind of disruption and
Mhm,
like the what was previously the education experience to allow for more innovative and flexible, student centered, and really, individualized to the student
yeah,
pathways to the education experience. Um, And actually, the Center for Public Research and Learning at Columbia convened an innovation cohort during the COVID pandemic with various stakeholders for that exact purpose, to try and determine if there's a way for us in the state of Connecticut to kind of shake up the status quo in terms of the what is a typical K-12 education experience and to respond to diverse student needs and to meet students where they are. Unfortunately, I don't think a lot came out of those
Mhm.
conversations. But as I react to that op-ed and the previous reporting by the Connecticut Mirror, in the state of Connecticut, it's easy to just look at the education cost sharing formula because it is the state's main form of equalization aid here in the state. But the state has, through the history of its existence, created various types of schools, created various types of funding structures, and various rules that impact a district's resources as well. And
Yeah.
unfortunately for Hartford Public Schools, where it's at the heart of the Sheff versus O'Neill ruling and the state's response, it has a very, very complex system. And I don't think that we should just point the finger at Hartford Public Schools because of this one graduate and then the teacher saying, this is happening all over the place. I think this is really a call to action for stakeholders and policymakers to really sit down and understand what is going on in our school districts and then to respond appropriately. So, like, my immediate reaction to that op-ed is one of sadness because these are systems that unfortunately the state needs to address and needs to modify in order to allow districts to maintain those school resource officers to ensure that they have appropriate supports. When you have a high they have Hartford has a very high percentage of students like far out of the range of normal for other urban areas of students that are outplaced in like not private provider facilities, for example. You need to invest in supports in district in order to keep students in district and to ensure that you have appropriate staffing at all times to meet the needs of students. And in Hartford Public Schools, they pay their teachers, very low
Mhm.
comparatively to their region, and they're simply not attractive for employees. They have very high need student population and very low salaries. So like they have a hard time with their staffing. They have vacancies all over the place. But these are all conversations that hopefully with this report and with the continued advocacy and discussion with policymakers, we can start to really effectuate change.
Yeah. And it sounds like part of it for you, the legislature would be to streamline some of this and make it easier. Some of the red tape that you said there's all these different programs. It's kind of streamline them all would be a huge help.
You are listening to the Municipal Voice on WNHH 103.5 FM.
CCM and the State School Finance Project are going to continue working on this, obviously. And we're planning on having a press conference coming up in New Haven. Tell us why is that significant, Joe?
Well, I think the continuing engagement in education of our communities is important because this is a very um, core fabric to all of the communities in our state. Yes, we all should or hopefully do care about the future of young people, but we also all should understand the economic impact that these challenges are having on Connecticut as a whole and on our communities, the quality of life impact that they can have. Frankly, Matt, when you go to any realtor website and you scroll down to the bottom of the realtor website on a home you're looking at, what's the one thing that they all have? They all have a great schools rating.
Yep.
How's the education system in this community? This has a real impact in terms of your home values, your property values, all of those types of things on doing this the right way. So I think the significance of these different meetings, these different local meetings and press conferences and events is to continue to get information out there to people. So, knowledge is power. So they actually understand where some of these challenges come from. And even though we have a plan that we put forward, like this work's been going on for a long time, and our plan is not It's not all inclusive. I mean, it's broad and it covers a lot of areas, but it's not a perfect plan. There is no perfect plan.
Yeah.
And so I think these conversations, these community conversations are important too, that we continue to learn from people, that we're not just pushing information out, but we're continuing to create a dialogue within our communities where people in our communities can, kind of converse with us and give us their ideas, and we can learn how to garner their engagement in this process. So that's why I think those things are important.
And Lisa, obviously you're doing this event with us. Why did you think it was important to participate in this?
Just because I think that the recommendations that the commission has put forward are very important, and we need to continue to elevate the need for individuals to understand the complex issues that face our students here in the state of Connecticut, and then to continue to generate, support and enthusiasm for continued action with policymakers across the state of Connecticut. And as Joe said, and I think he said it very eloquently, knowledge is power. And so just continuing to educate and to speak to local stakeholders to understand their perspective of issues that we can then go and elevate their voice with policymakers, I think is critically important. So we're happy to partner with CCM and with the commission and to do anything that we can do to support the efforts of implementing pieces of this policy moving forward.
Matt, I will add, I just think it kind of segues into it. In the work that we do here at
Mhm.
CCM, because we're, whether you want to call us bipartisan or you want to call us nonpartisan, whatever the case may be, we work, we have members of both sides of the aisle. We're very just community oriented. There are issues where our membership, where there are times that we sit back and say, man, if I just wish the Democrats would quit doing this, or man, I wish I could just get the Republicans to understand this. This is an issue that's really bipartisan at the State House as well. There has been tremendous engagement and support and understanding of the need to take on these challenges um, by friends that we have, partners in the General Assembly, partners in collaborative relationships that really started with Lisa and her group, that she began building long before we stepped into this space. But I'm particularly excited about the fact that I don't feel like we're starting at square one with the General Assembly. I think
Yeah.
they have been engaged, they're listening. It's not partisan. Everybody's trying to work on this and do the right thing. So if we can keep the energy going, I think there's real hope for progress here.
Yeah, I was really impressed personally by some of the legislators that showed up at those, nighttime meetings all across the state to,
Mhm.
be a part of that. It was really encouraging. So, Lisa, obviously, we had you here today because we want to talk about disconnected youth as our kind of big push right now. But are there any other priorities for you at the your organization that are coming up in this year?
So this year, upcoming legislative session, we're looking to continue implementing a policy that we've been working over the past few years to implement, that we've had very wide bipartisan support and getting partially implemented. We're looking to get that 100% implemented. And that essentially is, in a nutshell, extending the need-based education cost sharing formula to all public school students.
Okay.
So we're currently at partial phase-in, and we're looking to get it to 100%. And when you do that, it alleviates some financial burden on sending districts. It's a very weedy topic, but in a very high level, that's essentially what we'll be looking to do. In addition, we're looking to ensure that the state provide equitable facility funding, and really looking to see if there's some way for the state. And I haven't spoken to you about this, Joe, but I certainly will circle back. So as you know, the state provides resources to municipalities under the LoSIP program that allows for minor capital improvements within the municipality. There's no such program for school districts, and we think that, it is time for the state to consider that. So that's something else that we'll be discussing with the legislature, as well as the components that were identified by the 119K Commission. We have a foundation that has been static since the 1990s. It Costs have gone up every way, and so we need to ensure that the foundation is appropriate and is increased. Um, modifying all of those need-based weights that are currently in the education cost sharing formula, we are fully supportive of, and including a new special education weight. So we have a very wide-ranging policy proposal moving forward for the consideration of the General Assembly, and we're excited to get to work.
Great. Joe, is anything you want to respond to any of the topics that she just brought up, or are we feeling pretty
No,
good about them?
the response is easy for me. I mean, we look at the state school finance project to be a partner, and an incredibly important and valuable resource, to all of the work that we try to do as well. And when I say, I hope we're a resource at times to them as much as they are to us. And when I say a partner, it's just not trying to partner with them to help move our agenda. It's us leaning in as partners and trying to help move theirs, because they do really, really valuable work for
Yeah.
the state. So,
Thank you, Joe.
And kind of wrapping it up, Lisa, how do you feel about the future of education in Connecticut? To quote 119K Commissioner Josh Brown, he said, "We are Connecticut. We can do this." Do you agree? Do you think we're going to make inroads and make education truly work for everyone in this state?
I am constantly an optimist. The interest that I have seen in a bipartisan way and in both chambers in the General Assembly to address some of the education disparity issues that we've discussed with them over the past few years, I'm very encouraged. And they have shown tremendous support to move significant policy recommendations and increase funding for K-12 education. So yes, I am optimistic that we will continue to move the needle. And I think that, systems can be changed. There has to be the will to change them. And I think that this commission and this report and all of the good work that CCM and other stakeholders are doing will help to effectuate change.
Joe?
are we going to win this? And here's the thing that I'm so encouraged about is the amount of diversity of organizations that have come out and are doing this work. They've supported the 119K Commission, but it's not just about them supporting the 119K Commission. It's about them supporting the importance of this work, the importance of this issue. When you look and you have people who have heavily leaned in, like the Connecticut Business and Industry Association, CBIA, so the business community has come out very strongly in support of doing this. That's not a traditional partner necessarily to lean into this type of work, but they've been amazing partners. And then you go to the other end of it, and you have, like the business representatives and the unions aren't always eye to eye, right? You go to the other end of the spectrum, and you have the unions, particularly the teachers unions, that have leaned in and said the same thing. And then you have the nonprofit community that has done the same thing. And you have the superintendents and the boards of ed, and also legislators who have been a part of engaging in this, who have made positive comments, things the Speaker of the House have said, the minority leader of the House has come out and made statements. It's really encouraging when you look at that broad diversity of all of those groups. The United Way of Connecticut, they can't all be wrong. You know what I mean? So if you ever want to have hope or optimism, you look at that coalition. And again, that coalition, I think, started with the work that Lisa did. They were the first group to really start bringing all these people together. But it's carrying on now. It's, if you want to put together, like, who supports this, the idea really is create a column that says who doesn't.
Yeah.
Because nobody at this point has come out and said, no, we don't support this. It's everybody is over in that support column, which that doesn't make it easy. It doesn't mean it's something that lawmakers can just go in and say, okay, everybody agrees with this. Now we have to do it, because that's work. I mean, there's work in doing it. It's not a magic wand. There's no fairy dust that makes it all happen.
Yeah.
But my optimism comes from the fact that when you have the, like, who's in your corner and who's the opposition, it's not really any opposition right now. Everybody is trying to move this forward. And so I'm very optimistic that we'll make progress simply because of that, if nothing else.
Yeah, definitely. It all ties into one of our guiding principles, but collaborating for the common good.
Yeah.
Well, Lisa, Joe, thanks so much for speaking with us today. It's been a fascinating discussion and really important stuff.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, Matt. And thank you, Lisa.
We'd like to thank our guests, Lisa Hammersley and Joe DeLong. The Municipal Voice is a co-production by CCM and WNHH 103.5 FM. Joe Thornton is our executive producer, Christopher Gilson is our producer, Terry Draws is on the boards, and I'm Matt Ford, your host. Be sure to check out our Facebook page and give us a like, and watch out for our CCM chat series on our YouTube page.